There's a moment frozen in time at Pompeii where you can see the exact instant a civilization died. A baker's loaves still sit in ovens. Children's toys lie scattered in courtyards. Wine glasses rest half empty on tables. But here's what keeps archaeologists awake at night. Pompeii isn't unique. Across our planet, dozens of advanced civilizations didn't just decline or get conquered. They vanished completely. In some cases, literally overnight. Tonight, you're about to discover the most haunting mystery in human history. Not one civilization, but many, entire societies that built magnificent cities, developed complex writing systems, and ruled vast empires, only to disappear so suddenly and so completely that we're still finding their ruins buried under jungles, deserts, and forgotten hills. No farewell letters, no final battles recorded in stone, just silence. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about the rise and fall of civilizations. Because these weren't gradual collapses stretched across generations. These were rapid, catastrophic vanishings that happened so fast, people left their meals cooking on the fire. So settle in, dim those lights, and prepare yourself for a journey through time to places that shouldn't exist but do. Ghost cities that whisper of advanced knowledge we've lost forever, and civilizations that mastered technologies we still don't understand, only to disappear like smoke in the wind. In the scorching emptiness of the Arabian Peninsula, where endless dunes shift like golden seas under the merciless sun, lies one of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles. Here, somewhere beneath the sand, rests a city that was once more powerful than Rome, richer than Constantinople, and more mysterious than anything our ancestors left behind. The Quran speaks of it in hushed, warning tones, a place called Iram of the Pillars, though most knew it simply as Ubar. This wasn't just another ancient settlement. This was the beating heart of the global economy 3,000 years ago, a city so wealthy and arrogant that it defied the gods themselves. And then, in what may be the most dramatic disappearance in human history, it was swallowed whole by the earth in a single terrifying night. But let me tell you something that'll make your skin crawl. We found it, and what we discovered there changes everything we thought we knew about how civilizations die. For centuries, scholars dismissed Ubar as pure mythology, a cautionary tale spun by desert storytellers around flickering fires. The story seemed too fantastic to believe. A city of towering pillars and impossible wealth, built by a people so proud they thought themselves immortal, destroyed in 7 days and 7 nights by a sandstorm sent from heaven. But in the late 1980s, something extraordinary happened. Using NASA satellite imagery and following ancient caravan routes that showed up as faint lines in the sand, an obsessed amateur archaeologist named Nicholas Clapp did the impossible. He found Ubar. What they unearthed at a site called Shisur in southern Oman sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. This wasn't just another ruin. The entire fortress city had literally fallen into the earth. The ground beneath Ubar had been hollowed out by underground limestone caverns, and at some point, possibly in a single catastrophic moment, the weight of the city caused the surface to collapse into a massive sinkhole. Picture this. You're sleeping in your bed in what you believe is the most powerful city on Earth. Your vaults are filled with frankincense worth more than gold. Your ships dominate the seas from India to Rome. Your walls have never been breached. And then, without warning, the ground beneath your feet simply opens up. The entire city, palaces, temples, markets, homes, drops into a gaping wound in the earth. In minutes, perhaps hours, 1,000 years of civilization vanishes into darkness. But here's where this story becomes truly spine-chilling. The collapse wasn't random. Recent geological studies suggest it may have coincided with one of the region's legendary sandstorms, the kind that can strip flesh from bone and turn day into night for a week. Imagine the survivors, if there were any, watching their world disappear, not just into the earth, but under a wall of sand so massive it erased every trace from the surface. This wasn't conquest, this wasn't decline. This was obliteration so complete that for over a millennium, people believed Ubar was just a story. To understand why Ubar's disappearance was so catastrophic, you need to understand what frankincense meant to the ancient world. Today, we think of it as church incense, something pleasant but hardly essential. 3,000 years ago, it was liquid gold. Emperors paid armies wages for small quantities. It was used in religious ceremonies from Egypt to China, valued for its supposed power to carry prayers to the gods and heal the sick. And Ubar controlled it all. The city sat at the crossroads of the most important trade routes in the ancient world. Caravans would journey for months across deadly deserts just to reach Ubar's markets. Roman merchants sailed dangerous seas to trade directly with Ubar's kings. This was the Dubai of the ancient world, a commercial miracle that shouldn't have been possible in such a harsh landscape. But wealth breeds arrogance, and according to every account we have, the people of Ubar grew drunk on their own power. They built higher towers, demanded more tribute, claimed dominion over forces they couldn't control. Ancient texts describe them as believing they could challenge heaven itself. Whether you believe in divine punishment or geological coincidence, the result was the same. A civilization at the absolute peak of its power, controlling global trade routes and commanding respect from the greatest empires of the ancient world, was erased in what might have been the space of a single night. And here's what should terrify you about Ubar's fate. It wasn't weakened by war, devastated by plague, or slowly drained by economic collapse. It was thriving right up until the moment it vanished. The last coins minted there show no signs of decline. The trade routes were still active. The caravans were still coming. This is what makes Ubar so different from other fallen civilizations. Rome fell after centuries of decline. Egypt was conquered by foreign armies. Babylon was sacked and rebuilt multiple times. But Ubar was deleted from history while it was still writing its story. Today, if you visit the excavation site at Shissa, you can peer into the sinkhole that swallowed a civilization. The walls of the fortress still stand, but they end abruptly where the ground gave way. You can see the exact moment where a thriving city became a tomb. Archaeological layers show normal daily life, pottery, tools, evidence of meals in progress, and then nothing, just empty space where the earth opened up. Bedouin tribes in the region still speak in whispers of cursed places, where the sand shifts strangely at night, where compasses spin wildly, and where travelers report seeing lights that shouldn't exist. They'll tell you that on certain nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the echoes of Ubar, the sound of a great city falling into darkness. But Ubar's disappearance raises questions that go far beyond one lost city. If a civilization this powerful, this connected, this seemingly permanent could vanish overnight, what does that say about the stability of our own world? What other great cities might be sleeping beneath our feet, waiting to remind us that nothing, no matter how mighty, is truly permanent? The sand dunes around Shissa continue to shift and change, sometimes revealing new artifacts, sometimes burying them again. Each discovery adds pieces to the puzzle, but the central mystery remains. How does an empire disappear so completely that it becomes legend? As we'll discover, Ubar was just the beginning. Across the globe, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of civilization after civilization that didn't slowly decline. They were cut off mid-sentence, like books with their final chapters ripped away. Half a world away from the buried palaces of Ubar, another mystery was taking shape in the American Southwest. While Ubar was controlling the spice routes of the ancient world, a different kind of civilization was rising in the red rock canyons of what we now call Colorado and Utah. These people didn't build their cities on trade routes or river deltas. They carved them directly into the faces of impossible cliffs, creating one of the most stunning and mysterious architectural achievements in human history. They called themselves something we'll never know because they left no written records. Today we call them the ancestral Puebloans, though for generations they were known by a name that means ancient enemies in Navajo, Anasazi. For over 1,000 years, they thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth, building cities that seemed to defy the laws of physics and engineering. And then, in the 13th century, they did something that still baffles archaeologists today. They walked away from everything, not gradually, not over generations, but suddenly and completely. They abandoned cities that had taken centuries to build, left behind sophisticated irrigation systems and ceremonial centers, and vanished into the desert, leaving behind only empty dwellings and one of the most haunting mysteries in North American history. To understand how shocking their disappearance was, you need to see what they built. At Mesa Verde, tucked into alcoves high on sheer cliff faces, you'll find Cliff Palace, a 150-room apartment complex built entirely without mortar, fitting together like a three-dimensional puzzle carved from living rock. At Chaco Canyon, they constructed what archaeologists now recognize as one of the most sophisticated urban centers in pre-Columbian North America, complete with roads so straight and precise, they seem to have been laid out with modern surveying equipment. These weren't simple cave dwellings. They were masterpieces of engineering, with rooms that stayed warm in winter and cool in summer, sophisticated water collection systems, and ceremonial chambers called kivas that were perfectly circular and acoustically tuned. Some buildings were 4 stories tall, requiring builders to haul massive stone blocks up cliff faces using only rope and human strength. But here's what makes their disappearance so chilling. They didn't just abandon their cities, they sealed them. Many cliff dwellings show evidence of doors and windows being deliberately walled up, storage rooms being emptied and closed, and valuable items being carefully removed or buried. This wasn't a panicked flight. It was a methodical, organized abandonment that suggests they knew they weren't coming back. The scale of this evacuation is staggering. We're talking about thousands of people living in hundreds of communities across tens of thousands of square miles, all making the same decision at roughly the same time. Imagine if everyone in Colorado just decided to leave tomorrow, taking only what they could carry and sealing their homes behind them. That's essentially what happened in the 13th century American Southwest. What makes this mass exodus even more mysterious is that these people were supremely adapted to their environment. They had survived in the desert for over a millennium, weathering droughts, floods, and climate changes that would have destroyed less resilient societies. They had developed agricultural techniques that could coax crops from seemingly barren soil, built water management systems that worked for centuries, and created a culture so stable it had endured for 40 generations. So why did they leave? And perhaps more importantly, where did they go? The theories are as varied as they are unsettling. Climate data shows that the region experienced a severe drought beginning in the 1270s, but the ancestral Puebloans had survived droughts before. Archaeological evidence suggests increasing violence in the final decades before the abandonment. Fortified positions, burned buildings, and what some researchers delicately call evidence of social stress. But violence alone doesn't explain why an entire civilization would simply walk away from everything they'd built. Some of the most recent theories are the most disturbing. Analysis of human remains from the final period shows signs of nutritional stress and, in some cases, evidence of cannibalism. It's possible that the combination of climate change, resource depletion, and social breakdown created a perfect storm that made their homeland uninhabitable. But here's what haunts researchers about the ancestral Pueblo and disappearance. Unlike Ubar, which was destroyed by forces beyond human control, this civilization seems to have destroyed itself. The evidence suggests they didn't just leave because they had to. They left because they chose to. Walking away from 1,000 years of history rather than face whatever was coming next. Today, their descendants, the modern Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi, Zuni, and Acoma, maintain that their ancestors didn't disappear at all. They completed a spiritual migration, following prophecies that told them to leave the old places behind. In this view, the abandonment wasn't a collapse, but a transformation, a conscious choice to begin again somewhere else. But even if that's true, it doesn't answer the central mystery. How does an entire civilization coordinate such a massive, organized departure without leaving behind any record of their plans or destinations? How do thousands of people, scattered across hundreds of miles, all decide at the same moment that it's time to go? The empty cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde and the silent plazas of Chaco Canyon offer no answers. Only questions that echo off stone walls built by hands will never shake. In the fading light of a desert sunset, with shadows lengthening across abandoned courtyards, you can almost hear them, the voices of a people who built wonders in the wilderness and then walked away from it all, leaving us to wonder what they knew that we don't. Standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza, most tourists snap their photos and move on, never realizing they're looking at the remnants of a civilization that vanished so completely, we don't even know what they called themselves. While everyone focuses on the pharaohs and their tombs, few people know about the real mystery lying just beneath the desert sand. Evidence of a society so advanced it built cities with running water, perfect drainage systems, and urban planning that wouldn't look out of place in modern Manhattan. And then, around 1900 BCE, they simply stopped existing. This was the Indus Valley civilization, and their disappearance is perhaps the most unsettling vanishing act in human history. Not because of how they died, but because of how completely they were erased from memory. Picture this. You're walking through Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro at their peak, around 2600 BCE. The streets are laid out in perfect grids, wider than most roads in medieval Europe would be 2,000 years later. Every house has its own private well and bathroom connected to a sophisticated sewage system that's more advanced than anything Rome would build at its height. The standardized bricks are so uniform they could have been made yesterday. There are public baths, granaries that could feed thousands, and a level of urban planning that suggests a government so organized it makes modern city councils look chaotic. But here's what will make your skin crawl. Despite ruling over an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, despite having a population of over 4 million people, despite developing one of the world's first writing systems, we don't know a single name of a single ruler. We can't read their language. We don't know what they called their gods, their cities, or themselves. It's as if someone took an eraser to history and wiped out every trace of who they were as people. This wasn't a civilization that fell to invaders or collapsed under the weight of internal strife. The Indus Valley cities show no evidence of warfare, no burned buildings, no mass graves, no signs of violence whatsoever. They just emptied out. Streets that had bustled with merchants and artisans for over 1,000 years gradually fell silent. Wells that had provided clean water for generations went dry, and then the jungle claimed what was left. What makes their disappearance so chilling is how methodical it appears to have been. This wasn't panic or sudden catastrophe. Archaeological evidence suggests people left in waves over several generations, taking their most precious possessions with them. They drained the grain from the storehouses, removed the valuable metals from workshops, and abandoned cities so thoroughly that within a few centuries, even their locations were forgotten. The Indus script, carved on thousands of seals and tablets, remains one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. Despite decades of effort by the world's best codebreakers, we can't decipher a single word. It's not that the symbols are random or meaningless. They clearly follow grammatical patterns and contain repeated elements that suggest a sophisticated language, But without a Rosetta Stone, without any bilingual texts, the script might as well be from another planet. This creates a terrifying possibility. What if the Indus people deliberately destroyed their own historical records? What if their disappearance was so carefully planned that they erased every trace of their identity to prevent anyone from following them? Recent discoveries have only deepened the mystery. Satellite imagery has revealed hundreds of previously unknown Indus sites, suggesting the civilization was even larger and more complex than we imagined. But every new discovery brings the same result: more evidence of incredible sophistication, more proof of advanced urban planning, and absolutely no answers about who these people really were or why they vanished. The leading theory among archaeologists is climate change. Evidence suggests that around 2000 BCE, the monsoon patterns that fed the Indus River system began to shift. The Ghaggar-Hakra River, which may have been larger than the Indus itself, began to dry up. Without reliable water sources, agriculture failed, trade routes collapsed, and the cities became uninhabitable. But climate change alone doesn't explain the completeness of their disappearance. Other civilizations faced droughts and survived. The Egyptians dealt with famines. The Mesopotamians rebuilt after floods. The Indus people, despite being more advanced than any of them, simply gave up and walked away. Some researchers have proposed an even more unsettling theory. What if the Indus Valley civilization didn't disappear at all? What if they're still here? Their descendants scattered across South Asia, their culture absorbed so completely into later societies that we can't trace the connection. DNA studies of modern populations in Pakistan and northwest India show genetic continuity stretching back thousands of years. Certain cultural practices, architectural techniques, and even some religious symbols appear to have survived the transition from the Indus cities to later civilizations. If this is true, then the Indus Valley represents something even more disturbing than sudden collapse. It represents the complete reinvention of an entire civilization, a deliberate choice to abandon everything they had built and start over with a clean slate, erasing their past so thoroughly that even their own descendants forgot who they used to be. Standing in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro today, you can see the moment when this transformation began. The final layers of occupation show a clear decline in craftsmanship. The precise urban planning gives way to haphazard construction. The sophisticated drainage systems are patched with crude repairs. It's as if the people who built these marvels gradually forgot how to maintain them, or simply stopped caring. But perhaps most haunting of all are the unfinished projects. Excavations have uncovered construction sites where work simply stopped mid-task. Partially built walls, foundation stones laid out but never assembled, workshops with half-finished pottery still sitting on the wheels. It's as if the entire civilization just put down their tools one day and walked away, leaving behind a mystery that's lasted 4,000 years. The silence of the Indus Valley isn't just the absence of sound, it's the absence of memory itself. And that makes their disappearance the most complete vanishing act in human history. But even the mystery of the Indus Valley pales in comparison to what archaeologists discovered buried beneath a hill in southeastern Turkey. Because in 1994, while excavating what they thought was just another ancient settlement, researchers uncovered something that shattered every assumption about the development of human civilization. Something so old, so sophisticated, and so deliberately hidden that it forces us to rewrite the entire story of how societies rise and fall. They called it Göbekli Tepe, and it's 12,000 years old. To put that in perspective, Göbekli Tepe was already ancient when the first pharaoh was crowned in Egypt. It was a ruin when the wheel was invented. The people who built it lived closer in time to the last ice age than to the construction of the pyramids. And yet somehow, these supposedly primitive hunter-gatherers created one of the most sophisticated religious complexes ever discovered. complete with massive stone pillars covered in intricate carvings that would challenge modern sculptors. But here's what makes Göbekli Tepe truly terrifying as a historical mystery. After maintaining it for over 1,000 years, the builders deliberately buried the entire site under tons of stone and soil. They didn't abandon it. They didn't let it decay naturally. They methodically, carefully entombed their greatest achievement, sealing it away from the world as if they were trying to hide something too dangerous to leave exposed. What kind of civilization buries its own masterpiece? What knowledge was so powerful, so threatening, that an entire society decided it needed to be erased from history? And how did people who supposedly lived in caves and hunted mammoth possess the engineering skills to move 20-ton stone blocks with nothing but rope and human strength? The megaliths of Göbekli Tepe aren't just impressive for their age, they're impossible for their age. Each pillar is precisely carved with intricate reliefs of animals: serpents, scorpions, wild boars, vultures, and creatures that seem to dance around the stone in eternal procession. The craftsmanship is so sophisticated that some researchers have suggested the builders must have had metal tools, even though metallurgy wasn't supposed to be invented for another several thousand years. But the real mystery isn't how they built it, it's why they destroyed it. Layer by layer, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that Göbekli Tepe was deliberately filled in with carefully placed stones and debris. This wasn't natural accumulation over time. It was a conscious decision to erase the site from existence, carried out with the same precision and planning that created it in the first place. Recent ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest that what's been excavated so far is only the beginning. Beneath the soil lie dozens more stone circles, potentially containing hundreds of additional pillars. We're looking at a complex that could dwarf Stonehenge in both size and sophistication. Yet the builders chose to bury it all, creating one of history's most elaborate time capsules. The implications are staggering. If hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago could create something this advanced, what else were they capable of? What other achievements might be buried beneath hills and forests around the world, waiting to challenge everything we think we know about human development? And perhaps, most unsettling of all, if they buried Göbekli Tepe to hide it from future generations, what were they trying to protect us from? What knowledge did they possess that they decided was too dangerous to preserve? The empty chambers and silent pillars of Göbekli Tepe offer no answers, only questions that echo across 12 millennia. In the growing darkness of a Turkish hillside, surrounded by stones carved by hands that worked when the world was young, you can't shake the feeling that some secrets are meant to stay buried. But what if I told you that Göbekli Tepe wasn't the only ancient site deliberately buried by its own creators? What if there's a pattern here that archaeologists are only just beginning to recognize? A recurring theme of advanced civilizations not just disappearing, but actively erasing themselves from history. Because as we're about to discover, there's something far more sinister at work than simple collapse or abandonment. There's evidence of civilizations that possessed knowledge so profound, so potentially dangerous, that they made the conscious decision to take it with them into oblivion. Thousands of miles from the buried temples of Turkey, another impossible civilization was reaching its golden age. In the dense rainforests of Guatemala and Mexico, while Europe was still crawling out of the Dark Ages, a people we call the Maya were calculating the movements of planets with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched until the invention of modern computers. They built pyramids that aligned perfectly with celestial events, developed a writing system more complex than hieroglyphs, and created calendars so precise they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. But here's what will make your blood run cold. At the height of their mathematical and astronomical achievements, at the moment when their cities housed millions of people and their influence stretched across Central America, they simply stopped. not gradually, not over generations. In less than a century, cities that had thrived for over 1,000 years fell silent, their pyramids swallowed by jungle, their knowledge lost to time. The Maya collapse of the 9th century CE is one of archaeology's most disturbing mysteries, because it defies every pattern we've come to expect from civilizations in decline. There were no foreign invasions, no volcanic eruptions, no obvious catastrophes. The Maya simply walked away from the greatest intellectual achievement in pre-Columbian America, leaving behind empty cities and questions that still haunt researchers today. To understand the scale of this abandonment, you need to picture what Maya cities looked like at their peak. Tikal, in modern Guatemala, was home to over 100,000 people, larger than any European city of its time. Its pyramids soared 200 feet above the jungle canopy, their peaks visible for miles. The city was connected to dozens of other Maya centers by raised stone highways called sakbis that cut straight through swamps and forests with engineering precision that rivals modern interstate systems. But it wasn't just the architecture that was advanced. The Maya were the first civilization in the Americas to develop true writing, creating thousands of texts carved in stone and written on bark paper. They calculated the length of the solar year to 365.420 days, more accurate than the calendar we use today. They understood the concept of zero before it appeared in European mathematics. They tracked the movements of Venus so precisely they could predict its position decades in advance. And then, sometime around 850 CE, it all stopped. The last dated Maya monument was carved in 909 CE, and after that, nothing. The great cities didn't burn or crumble, they were simply abandoned. Palaces that had housed kings for centuries stood empty. Markets that had bustled with traders from across Mesoamerica fell silent. Pyramids that had reached toward the gods were left to the vines and monkeys. What makes this abandonment so chilling is the evidence of how sudden it was. Archaeological excavations have uncovered half-finished construction projects, sculptures abandoned mid-carving, and what researchers call termination deposits, ritual caches of broken pottery and jade that suggest the Maya deliberately destroyed sacred objects before leaving. It's as if they knew they weren't coming back and wanted to ensure certain things remained buried forever. The theories about what caused the Maya collapse read like a catalogue of apocalyptic scenarios: severe drought lasting decades, warfare between city-states that spiraled out of control, environmental destruction from deforestation and soil exhaustion, social revolution that overthrew the priest kings and shattered the foundations of Maya society. But none of these theories explain the most disturbing aspect of the Maya disappearance: the complete abandonment of their writing system. The Maya codices, bark paper books that contained their history, astronomy, and religious beliefs, were systematically destroyed not just by Spanish conquistadors centuries later, but by the Maya themselves. Of the thousands of books that once filled Maya libraries, only 4 survive today. The rest were burned, buried, or simply allowed to rot in the jungle humidity. This wasn't ignorance or neglect. The Maya script was one of the most sophisticated writing systems ever developed, capable of expressing complex philosophical and mathematical concepts. Yet within generations of the Great Abandonment, the ability to read and write Maya hieroglyphs was lost completely. It's as if an entire civilization chose to become illiterate, deliberately severing their connection to their own intellectual heritage. Recent discoveries have only deepened the mystery. LiDAR scanning has revealed that Maya cities were even larger and more interconnected than previously thought. Hidden beneath the jungle canopy are thousands of structures, connected by an elaborate network of roads and water management systems that turned the entire region into a single, massive urban landscape. The Maya weren't just building cities, they were terraforming the jungle itself, which makes their abandonment even more inexplicable. How do you walk away from 1,000 years of environmental engineering? How do you abandon infrastructure that took generations to build? How do you leave behind the accumulated knowledge of centuries? But perhaps the most unsettling discovery of all is what happened to the Maya after the great cities fell. They didn't disappear as a people. Maya communities continued to exist in the region, but they had regressed to a level of technology and social organization that was primitive compared to their classical ancestors. It's as if they had forgotten how to be great, or perhaps more accurately, had chosen to forget. Spanish conquistadors arriving in the 16th century found Maya communities living in simple villages, practicing slash-and-burn agriculture, and worshipping gods they could no longer name properly. When shown the great pyramids and temples of their ancestors, many Maya claimed they had been built by a different people entirely, giants or gods who had lived in the time before time. This collective amnesia is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Maya collapse. Not only did they abandon their cities and their knowledge, they erased the memory of who they used to be. Entire generations grew up in the shadow of monuments they believed had been built by supernatural beings, never knowing they were looking at the achievements of their own ancestors. Today, as researchers work to decode the remaining Maya texts and uncover new ruins beneath the jungle, one question haunts every discovery. What did the Maya know that made them choose ignorance over enlightenment? What knowledge was so dangerous that they decided it was better to forget than to remember? The answers may lie buried in the ruins of cities yet to be discovered, or in the few surviving codices that researchers are still struggling to translate. But every new revelation about Maya sophistication only makes their disappearance more mysterious, more deliberate, and more terrifying. Because if a civilization capable of such intellectual achievements could simply choose to forget, what does that say about the stability of human knowledge itself? What other great discoveries might have been deliberately buried by their own creators? And what warnings might be hidden in the ruins they left behind? The silence of the Maya cities isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. And in that silence, we're forced to confront a possibility that challenges everything we believe about progress and civilization, that sometimes the greatest knowledge is the knowledge we choose not to preserve. But even the deliberate forgetting of the Maya pales in comparison to what happened on a small island in the Pacific, where another advanced civilization didn't just abandon their knowledge, they turned their gods against themselves in an act of cultural suicide so complete, it left investigators wondering if we're looking at the remnants of a society or the aftermath of a collective madness that consumed an entire people. The wind still whispers across Easter Island, carrying with it the echo of one of history's most disturbing mysteries. Here, in the most isolated inhabited place on Earth, a civilization didn't just vanish, it devoured itself. The famous stoneheads, those haunting moai that stare silently across the Pacific, aren't monuments to greatness. They're tombstones marking the grave of a society that literally worked itself to death in service of gods that may have driven them insane. What happened on Rapa Nui between 1200 and 1700 CE reads like a horror story written in stone and bone, but it's not fiction. It's a documented case of civilizational suicide so complete, so methodical, that it forces us to ask the most terrifying question in archaeology: can an entire society go mad? The first Polynesian settlers who reached Easter Island around 1200 CE found paradise. Lush palm forests covered the island. Streams ran clear and cold down volcanic slopes. The soil was rich, the fishing excellent, the climate perfect. They had everything they needed to build a sustainable civilization in complete isolation, 2,000 miles from the nearest populated land. And they did build something extraordinary. The moai, those massive stone heads, weren't just impressive sculptures. They were feats of engineering that should have been impossible for their time. Nearly 900 of them dot the island, some weighing up to 82 tons. carved from volcanic rock, using only stone tools. The largest completed moai stands 33 feet tall. They were somehow transported miles from the quarries to their final positions, then fitted with massive redstone headdresses weighing another 12 tons each. But here's what makes your skin crawl. The moai weren't built gradually over centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests they were carved and erected in an increasingly frenzied burst of construction that lasted roughly 500 years. As the centuries passed, the statues grew larger, more elaborate, more impossible to build and transport. It was as if the entire civilization became obsessed with an escalating competition to honor their ancestors, pouring every resource into monuments that served no practical purpose. And that obsession killed them. Recent analysis of the island's ecosystem reveals a catastrophe so complete, it reads like an environmental horror story. The palm forests that had covered the island for thousands of years disappeared entirely. Not gradually, within a few generations. The settlers had cut down every tree, not just for canoes and shelter, but to move the moai. They used massive wooden rollers to transport the statues, consuming forests that had taken millennia to grow. Without trees, the topsoil washed away. Without canoes, they couldn't reach the deep-sea fishing grounds. Without wood for tools and weapons, they couldn't hunt the seabirds that had once provided protein. The island's carrying capacity plummeted from supporting perhaps 15,000 people to barely 2,000. And still, they kept building statues. Archaeological evidence from this period tells a story so disturbing that researchers initially refused to believe it. As resources dwindled and starvation set in, Rapa Nui society didn't adapt. It cannibalized itself. Literally. Human bones found in garbage pits show cut marks consistent with butchering. Oral traditions speak of the time of the toppled kings, when warriors would raid enemy villages, kill the inhabitants, and feast on their flesh. But even cannibalism wasn't enough to stop the statue building. If anything, it seemed to accelerate it. The final moai constructed on Easter Island are the most elaborate and technically challenging of all, as if the civilization's death throes had unleashed a final burst of manic creativity. Then, sometime in the 17th century, something snapped. The statue building stopped abruptly. Not only that, the islanders began systematically destroying their own creations. Nearly every moai was toppled from its platform, many deliberately broken. The stone quarries were abandoned mid-project, leaving nearly 400 partially completed statues scattered across the landscape, like a frozen scream of interrupted ambition. This wasn't conquest by outsiders. European contact wouldn't come for another century. This was a civilization turning against itself with such violence that they destroyed not just their society, but their sacred monuments, the very gods they had spent centuries trying to please. What makes the Easter Island collapse so uniquely terrifying is how preventable it was. The islanders weren't facing external threats or natural disasters beyond their control. They had all the information they needed to see what was coming. They watched the forest shrink year by year. They felt the soil wash away after every storm. They saw the seabird colonies collapse and the fishing decline. Yet they chose to keep building statues rather than plant trees. It's as if the entire society had become trapped in a ritual madness, unable to break free from a pattern of behavior they knew was destroying them. Some researchers have suggested that the statue cult had become so central to Rapa Nui identity that abandoning it would have meant cultural death, so they chose literal death instead. But here's what should keep you awake at night. Recent studies suggest that Easter Island's ecological collapse happened much faster than previously thought. Carbon dating indicates that the final palm trees may have been cut down within a single generation. One day, there was a forest. A few decades later, nothing but grassland remained. Imagine being the person who cut down the last tree on Easter Island. Did they know it was the last one? Did they understand what they were doing? Or were they so focused on moving one more statue, honoring one more ancestor, that they couldn't see they were cutting the final thread holding their civilization together. The moai that remain standing today, mostly the ones that were never moved from the quarries, stare out across the Pacific with expressions that seem almost accusatory, as if they're judging not just their creators, but all of humanity. They're a warning carved in stone. This is what happens when a society becomes so obsessed with symbols of greatness that it forgets the foundations that make greatness possible. When European explorers finally reached Easter Island in 1722, they found a population of perhaps 3,000 people living in caves and grass huts, practicing a degraded form of the ancestral religion and claiming they had no idea who had built the massive statues that dominated their landscape. In less than a century, the descendants of master engineers and sculptors had regressed to a Stone Age existence, their cultural memory as devastated as their environment. But the horror story wasn't over. European contact brought diseases that reduced the population to just over 100 people by the 1870s. Slave raiders kidnapped much of the remaining population, including all the priests and chiefs who might have preserved the old knowledge. The Rongorongo script, Easter Island's unique writing system, died with them, taking the last threads of their ancient wisdom to the grave. Today, Easter Island stands as perhaps the starkest example of civilizational suicide in human history. Not conquest, not natural disaster, not gradual decline, but a society that literally consumed itself in service of increasingly impossible dreams. The moai that tourists photograph are actually monuments to madness, markers of a civilization that chose destruction over adaptation. And here's the most chilling part. It could happen again. Some researchers argue that Easter Island is a microcosm of our entire planet, a closed system with finite resources and a population that seems incapable of changing destructive patterns even when the consequences are obvious. We watch our forests disappear, our climate change, our resources dwindle, yet we keep building our own version of moai, monuments to consumption that may ultimately destroy the very foundations of our survival. The wind across Easter Island carries more than just salt spray from the Pacific. It carries a warning from the past, whispered by the voices of a people who forgot that survival matters more than symbols, that adaptation trumps tradition, and that sometimes the greatest act of worship is knowing when to stop. But Easter Island's tragedy was at least confined to a single island. What we're about to explore next makes the Rapa Nui collapse look like a minor mishap, because there's evidence of civilizations that didn't just destroy themselves, they may have taken advanced knowledge with them that could have changed the course of human history. Knowledge so profound that its loss set our species back thousands of years, leaving us to rediscover in the modern era what our ancestors may have known long ago. And the most terrifying part? Some of these vanished civilizations may have possessed technologies that we still don't understand today. Deep beneath the Mediterranean Sea, marine archaeologists have discovered something that shouldn't exist. Massive stone blocks, perfectly cut and fitted together, lying on the ocean floor in formations that suggest they once stood as monuments. But here's what makes your blood run cold. These structures are in water depths that have been submerged for over 11,000 years, from a time when we're told humans were still learning to farm. What if everything we've been taught about the rise of civilization is wrong? What if advanced societies existed long before our recorded history, only to vanish so completely that we've forgotten they ever existed at all? Tonight, you're about to discover evidence of something far more disturbing than simple collapse or conquest. Because scattered across our planet, buried beneath layers of time and silence, lie the remains of civilizations that didn't just disappear. They were systematically erased from history itself. And some of them possess knowledge that makes our modern achievements look primitive by comparison. In the azure waters off the coast of Japan, where the Pacific currents carry whispers of forgotten ages, lies a discovery that has sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. The Yonaguni Monument, a massive underwater structure that defies every assumption about when human civilization began to build in stone. At first glance, it might seem like just another geological curiosity, but look closer and you'll see something that will make you question everything you think you know about our past. Rising from the sea floor like a drowned cathedral, the Yonaguni Monument stretches over 500 feet long and towers nearly 90 feet from the ocean bottom. Its surfaces aren't the random product of natural erosion. They're carved with geometric precision that would challenge modern engineers. Perfect right angles, flat terraces connected by massive steps, and what appear to be ceremonial platforms, all arranged in patterns that speak of deliberate human design. But here's what makes this discovery truly terrifying. These structures have been underwater for at least 12,000 years, submerged since the end of the last ice age when melting glaciers raised sea levels worldwide. That means whoever built Yonaguni was creating monumental architecture when mainstream archaeology tells us humans were still living in caves and hunting mammoth with stone spears. Marine biologist Dr. Masaki Kimura has spent decades diving these waters, mapping every surface and measuring every angle. His conclusion is as shocking as it is undeniable. Yonaguni is artificial. The precision of the cuts, the consistency of the geometric patterns, and the presence of what appear to be tool marks on the stone all point to human construction on a scale that shouldn't have been possible 12,000 years ago. But Yonaguni isn't alone. Across the world's oceans, similar structures are emerging from the deep. Off the coast of India, sonar mapping has revealed massive stone formations beneath the waves, walls, foundations, and what appear to be entire cities drowned by rising seas. Near the Bahamas, perfectly straight stone roads disappear into oceanic depths, their destination lost beneath miles of water. Each discovery pushes back the timeline of advanced civilization further into the past, suggesting that our ancestors weren't the primitive hunter-gatherers we've imagined, but sophisticated builders capable of projects that would challenge us today. And if they could build underwater monuments that have survived for over 10 millennia, what else were they capable of? The implications are staggering. If advanced civilizations existed before the end of the Ice Age, civilizations capable of monumental construction and precise engineering, then human history isn't a steady climb from primitive to advanced. It's a cycle of rise and fall, of knowledge gained and lost, of entire ages of human achievement wiped from memory by catastrophes so complete they reset our species back to the Stone Age. But what could cause such complete devastation? What force could be so powerful that it not only destroyed advanced civilizations, but erased almost every trace of their existence? The answer may lie in the geological record itself, in evidence of global catastrophes that make modern natural disasters look like minor inconveniences. Around 12,800 years ago, something happened to our planet. The geological evidence is undeniable. Massive extinctions, sudden climate changes, and what researchers are calling impact signatures in ice cores and sediment layers worldwide. Some scientists believe a comet or asteroid struck the Earth, triggering a period of rapid cooling known as the Younger Dryas. But others suggest something even more catastrophic, a solar event so powerful it fundamentally changed the face of our planet. Imagine the sun suddenly unleashing energy equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections scorching the atmosphere, triggering massive earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunami waves hundreds of feet high. In such a scenario, even the most advanced civilizations would be helpless. Their cities would be swept away, their populations decimated, their knowledge lost to the flames and floods. The survivors, if there were any, would be scattered, traumatized, reduced to the most basic struggle for survival. Within generations, the memory of their former greatness would fade into myth and legend. The sophisticated technologies, the monumental architecture, the accumulated wisdom of millennia All of it would become stories told around fires by people who could barely remember how to make fire themselves. This isn't just speculation. Ancient texts from around the world described remarkably similar catastrophes: great floods that drowned the world, fires that fell from the sky, times when the sun stood still, or the earth shook for days on end. The Hindu Vedas speak of weapons that could destroy entire cities. The Bible tells of a flood that covered the highest mountains. The Aztecs described multiple ages of creation and destruction, each ending in global catastrophe. What if these weren't just myths? What if they were ancestral memories of real events passed down through oral tradition by the descendants of civilizations we can barely imagine? Recent discoveries in Turkey have added another piece to this puzzle. At Göbekli Tepe, that mysterious temple complex we discussed earlier, researchers have found something that makes their deliberate burial even more ominous. Carved into one of the massive pillars, they've discovered what appears to be a star map, a precise astronomical record showing the positions of constellations exactly as they appeared around 10,950 BCE. But it's not just any star map. The carvings seem to depict a specific moment in time, a cosmic event of tremendous significance. Some researchers believe it's showing the position of the stars during the catastrophe that ended the last ice age. A celestial timestamp marking the moment when an advanced prehistoric civilization met its doom. If this interpretation is correct, then Göbekli Tepe isn't just a temple, it's a monument to the end of the world. The people who built it weren't primitive hunters creating their first religious site. They were the survivors of a global catastrophe, using their remaining knowledge to create a warning for future generations. A message carved in stone that says, "Remember what happened. Remember how it all ended. Remember so it doesn't happen again." G-phrase. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this theory is what it implies about cycles of human civilization. If advanced societies existed before the catastrophe, 12,800 years ago, how many times has this happened? How many times has our species climbed from primitive to advanced, only to be knocked back to the Stone Age by forces beyond our control? Archaeological evidence suggests this pattern may have repeated multiple times throughout human history. The mysterious megalithic sites scattered across the globe, Stonehenge, the pyramids, Easter Island's Moai, might not be isolated achievements by different cultures. They might be the surviving fragments of much older knowledge, rebuilt by civilizations that were trying to recreate what their ancestors had lost. Consider the precision of ancient astronomy. The Maya calculated the length of the solar year more accurately than our modern calendar. The builders of the pyramids aligned them with stellar coordinates that wouldn't be discovered by European astronomers for another 1,000 years. Ancient Polynesian navigators crossed vast oceanic distances using star maps memorized with mathematical precision. How did these supposedly primitive people possess such sophisticated knowledge? Unless they weren't primitive at all. Unless they were the inheritors of wisdom that stretched back through catastrophe and collapse to civilizations we've forgotten ever existed. But if this is true, if human history is a cycle of rise and fall rather than linear progress, then we face a terrifying question. What happens when our cycle ends? Are we building toward our own catastrophe, accumulating knowledge and power that we may not be wise enough to control? The evidence suggests we may already be repeating the patterns that led to previous collapses. Climate change, environmental destruction, the development of weapons capable of destroying civilization itself. These aren't modern problems. They may be ancient ones, recurring challenges that every advanced society faces as it approaches the peak of its development. And if the pattern holds, if the cycle continues, then our advanced civilization might join the others beneath the waves, buried under layers of sediment and time, waiting for future archaeologists to puzzle over our ruins and wonder how we could have built such wonders, only to let them crumble into dust. The underwater monuments off Japan and India, the buried temples of Turkey, the drowned roads of the Bahamas, They're not just archaeological curiosities, they're warnings, echoes from the deep past, telling us that nothing lasts forever, that even the greatest civilizations can vanish without a trace, leaving only whispers in stone and shadows beneath the waves. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the possibility that some of these vanished civilizations possessed knowledge that we've lost forever. Technologies that could solve our modern problems. Wisdom that could guide us away from the mistakes that destroyed them. Secrets that could change everything. All of it lying buried beneath thousands of years of silence, just out of reach. As we stand on the brink of our own technological revolution, developing artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and energy sources that could reshape our world, we might do well to listen to those whispers from the past. Because if history truly is cyclical, if civilizations rise and fall in patterns as predictable as the tides, then understanding what happened to our predecessors might be the key to ensuring we don't share their fate. The ocean depths hold more than sunken ships and lost treasure. They hold the memory of worlds we've forgotten, civilizations that vanished so completely we're only now beginning to suspect they ever existed at all. And in their silence, they're trying to tell us something we desperately need to hear, that greatness without wisdom leads not to immortality, but to oblivion. The question is, are we listening? But what if I told you that some of these lost civilizations didn't just disappear naturally? What if there's evidence that certain advanced societies made the calculated decision to erase themselves from history? Not because they had to, but because they discovered knowledge so dangerous, so potentially catastrophic, that they chose extinction over the risk of that knowledge falling into the wrong hands. Deep in the highlands of modern-day Peru, archaeologists have uncovered something that defies explanation. High in the Andes, where the air is so thin it burns your lungs and the mountains scrape the belly of the sky, lies Sacsayhuaman, a fortress built from stones so massive and fitted so precisely that you can't slide a knife blade between them. Some of these blocks weigh over 200 tons. They were quarried from sites miles away, transported up impossible slopes, and assembled with a precision that would challenge modern construction equipment. But here's what makes your blood run cold. The Incas, who supposedly built this marvel, had no written language, no wheels, no iron tools, and no knowledge of the pulley system. According to conventional archaeology, they accomplished this feat using nothing but bronze chisels, rope, and human strength. It's like claiming someone built a skyscraper using only kitchen knives and shoelaces. When Spanish conquistadors first saw Sacsayhuaman in the 16th century, they were so stunned they declared it must have been built by demons. Even the Incas themselves claimed they hadn't built it. They told the Spanish it was constructed by an earlier race of giants during the time of darkness, before the sun was born. They called these mysterious builders the Viracocha, bearded, fair-skinned beings who possessed godlike powers and vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. Recent analysis of the stonework has revealed something even more disturbing. The massive blocks weren't just cut and fitted, they were melted. That's right, melted. The stone surfaces show signs of vitrification, a process that requires temperatures of over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Some researchers have found evidence of what appears to be machine tooling, with cuts so precise they could only have been made with diamond-tipped instruments or some form of advanced laser technology. But that's impossible, right? No ancient civilization could have possessed such advanced metallurgy or precision tooling, unless of course they did, unless what we're looking at isn't the work of primitive people with bronze tools, but the remnants of a technology so advanced we can barely comprehend it today. And here's where the story takes a truly sinister turn. Throughout the Andes, archaeologists have discovered dozens of similar sites, all displaying the same impossible precision, all showing evidence of advanced construction techniques, and all abandoned at roughly the same time. But unlike other ancient sites that show signs of gradual decline or violent destruction, these places appear to have been methodically deactivated. Storage chambers were emptied. Valuable metals were removed. Sacred objects were hidden or destroyed. It's as if whoever built these marvels decided they were too dangerous to leave intact, too powerful to risk falling into the wrong hands. They didn't abandon their achievements, they actively dismantled them. This pattern of deliberate destruction appears throughout the ancient world, but nowhere is it more evident than in the mysterious civilization that once flourished in what is now Bolivia. At an altitude of over 12,000 feet, where the air is so thin that most people can barely walk without gasping, stand the ruins of Tiwanaku, a city that shouldn't exist. The precision of Tiwanaku's construction makes even Sacsayhuaman look primitive. Massive stone blocks, some weighing over 450 tons, are fitted together with joints so tight they're waterproof without mortar. The famous Gateway of the Sun is carved from a single 15-ton block of andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, yet it's decorated with intricate reliefs that would challenge modern diamond-cutting tools. But what makes Tiwanaku truly terrifying is what happened to it. Sometime around 1000 CE, at the height of its power and influence, the entire civilization simply vanished. Not gradually, not over generations. Within a few decades, a city that had dominated the Andes for over 1,000 years was completely abandoned. Archaeological evidence suggests this wasn't conquest or natural disaster. The abandonment was planned, methodical, almost ritualistic. Valuable artifacts were removed, important structures were carefully dismantled, and certain areas were deliberately buried under tons of earth and stone. It's as if the builders were trying to hide something, to ensure that whatever knowledge they possessed would die with them. But perhaps most disturbing of all are the oral traditions preserved by local Aymara people, who claim to be descendants of Tiwanaku's builders. They speak of a time when their ancestors possessed powers that modern people have forgotten. The ability to make stones float through the air using sound, to cut through the hardest rock with tools that channeled the power of the sun, to communicate across vast distances without words. These aren't just fairy tales or primitive superstitions. They're remarkably consistent accounts passed down through generations, describing technologies that sound suspiciously similar to acoustic levitation, laser cutting, and some form of advanced telecommunications. What if these oral traditions aren't myths, but memories? What if they're describing real technologies possessed by a civilization so advanced it makes our modern achievements look like finger painting? But if such technologies existed, why did they vanish so completely? Why would a civilization capable of moving 450-ton stones with sound waves choose to forget how to do it? The answer might lie in what happened next in the historical record. Or rather, what didn't happen. After Tiwanaku's abandonment, the entire region entered what historians euphemistically call a dark period. For over 400 years, there are virtually no archaeological remains, no construction projects, no evidence of organized civilization. It's as if the entire population had simply evaporated, leaving behind only empty landscapes and whispered memories. When the Incas finally rose to power centuries later, they built impressive structures, but nothing approaching the precision and scale of Tiwanaku. It was as if humanity had forgotten how to be great, as if crucial knowledge had been deliberately erased from the collective memory. This pattern, advanced achievement followed by deliberate forgetting, appears across multiple civilizations throughout history. The Library of Alexandria, which contained the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, wasn't just burned by invaders. Recent research suggests it was systematically dismantled by its own keepers, who removed the most dangerous texts before allowing the rest to be destroyed. The Templars, who possessed advanced engineering knowledge that allowed them to build Gothic cathedrals that still defy structural analysis today, were wiped out in a single coordinated strike across Europe. But before their arrest, they had already hidden or destroyed their most precious documents, ensuring that certain secrets would die with them. Even the Maya, whose mathematical and astronomical achievements we discussed earlier, didn't just abandon their cities, they systematically destroyed their libraries, burning thousands of codices that contained knowledge we can barely imagine. Only 4 Maya books survive today, and they hint at understanding of physics, astronomy, and mathematics that wouldn't be rediscovered until the modern era. What kind of knowledge would be so dangerous that entire civilizations would choose to forget it rather than risk its misuse? What discoveries could be so potentially catastrophic that advanced societies would literally commit cultural suicide to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands? The answer might lie in the very technologies that made these civilizations great in the first place. Consider what we know about sound and vibration. Modern science has demonstrated that certain frequencies can levitate objects, shatter stone, even alter the molecular structure of materials. If ancient civilizations had mastered these principles, if they had learned to harness acoustic energy for construction and manufacturing, they would have possessed godlike power over the physical world. But such power comes with terrible risks. Sound weapons could level cities. Resonance technology could trigger earthquakes. Acoustic manipulation could destabilize the very foundations of the earth itself. Perhaps these ancient masters realized that their knowledge was too dangerous for humanity to possess, too powerful for any single civilization to control, so they made the ultimate sacrifice. They chose forgetting over greatness, ignorance over power, ensuring that their most dangerous discoveries would die with them, rather than risk the destruction of the world itself. This theory gains credibility when you examine the myths and legends surrounding these vanished civilizations. The story of Atlantis, told by Plato, describes an advanced society that possessed technologies beyond imagination, until they became too proud, too ambitious, too willing to use their power for destructive purposes. As punishment, they were destroyed in a single day and night, their entire civilization swallowed by the sea. The Hindu Vedas describe wars fought with weapons that could destroy entire armies, flying machines called vimanas, and technologies that sound remarkably similar to nuclear weapons. The Mahabharata speaks of battles where warriors wielded brahmastra, weapons that could level mountains and poison the earth for generations. What if these weren't just stories? What if they were warnings, encoded in myth and legend, by civilizations that had witnessed the consequences of unchecked technological advancement? What if the disappearance of these great societies wasn't caused by external forces, but by the terrible realization that they had created the means of their own destruction? The evidence is scattered across our planet, like fragments of a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a glimpse of knowledge too dangerous to remember. In Peru, stones that were melted and shaped by unknown technologies. In Bolivia, construction techniques that defy modern engineering. In Egypt, pyramids built with precision that we still can't replicate. In India, ancient texts describing weapons that sound like science fiction. But perhaps most chilling of all are the consistent reports of deliberate destruction and forgetting. These weren't civilizations that fell to external enemies or natural disasters. They were societies that chose to erase themselves, to burn their libraries and bury their achievements, rather than risk the consequences of their own knowledge. And as we stand on the brink of our own technological revolution, developing artificial intelligence that could surpass human intelligence, genetic engineering that could reshape life itself, and energy sources that could power our civilization for millennia or destroy it in an instant, we might do well to ask ourselves, are we repeating the same pattern? Are we approaching the same crossroads that faced our predecessors? Because if the cycle continues, if history truly does repeat itself, then our advanced civilization might soon face the same choice that destroyed so many others. The choice between forgetting and annihilation, between ignorance and extinction. The whispers from the past are growing louder. The buried cities are revealing their secrets. And in their silence, they're trying to tell us something we desperately need to hear. That some knowledge is too dangerous to possess, some power too great to wield, and some discoveries too catastrophic to remember. The question is, will we listen to their warnings, Or will we join them in the graveyard of forgotten civilizations, leaving behind only mysteries for future archaeologists to puzzle over? The answer may determine not just our future, but our very survival as a species. The answers we seek may lie not in the ruins themselves, but in the terrifying pattern they reveal when examined together. Because what if I told you that the most advanced civilization in humanish, they took just Van history, did with them a technology so revolutionary, it could have transformed our entire understanding of physics itself. Hidden deep in the volcanic mountains of Armenia, where ancient stones sleep beneath centuries of accumulated earth, lies a secret that has haunted researchers for over a century. In 1893, while excavating what appeared to be a simple medieval foundation, archaeologists uncovered something that shouldn't exist. A series of massive underground chambers carved with mathematical precision from solid bedrock, connected by tunnels that stretch for miles in perfectly straight lines through solid mountain. But here's what makes your blood freeze. Carbon dating of organic materials found sealed within these chambers suggests they're over 10,000 years old. That makes them contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, built when mainstream archaeology insists humans were still learning to farm. Yet the engineering sophistication displayed in these underground networks rivals anything we could build today. The chambers aren't random caves or natural formations. They're precisely engineered spaces with acoustic properties that modern sound engineers struggle to explain. Stand in the center of certain rooms and whisper. Your voice will be amplified and carried through stone corridors with crystal clarity for over a mile. Sing a specific note and the entire chamber resonates in perfect harmony, creating frequencies that seem to vibrate in your bones. Local legends speak of these tunnels as pathways used by ancient priests who could communicate across vast distances using only their voices. But recent analysis suggests something far more sophisticated was happening here. The chambers appear to be tuned to specific frequencies, the same frequencies that modern researchers have discovered can levitate objects, alter molecular structures, and even affect human consciousness. What if these weren't just communication tunnels? What if they were laboratories, where an ancient civilization conducted experiments in acoustic physics that we're only beginning to understand today? What if they had mastered technologies that we've forgotten? Technologies so advanced they could manipulate matter itself, using nothing but sound. But like every other advanced civilization we've explored tonight, whoever built these acoustic marvels didn't just abandon them, they sealed them. Every entrance was carefully blocked with massive stone plugs. Every chamber was methodically emptied of artifacts. Every tunnel was deliberately filled with debris, as if the builders were trying to ensure their secrets would never be discovered. And here's what makes this abandonment truly chilling. The sealing appears to have been done from the inside. Archaeological evidence suggests that the final chambers were sealed by people who remained within the tunnels, choosing to be buried alive with their knowledge, rather than risk it falling into the wrong hands. The implications are staggering. What discovery could be so dangerous that an entire civilization would choose collective suicide rather than let it survive? What acoustic technology could be so potentially catastrophic that its masters would rather die than risk its misuse? But Armenia isn't the only place where we find evidence of advanced acoustic engineering. In the Sahara Desert, beneath the sand dunes that have shifted for millennia, ground-penetrating radar has detected vast underground chambers with the same precise acoustic properties. In the mountains of Peru, researchers have discovered caves carved with mathematical precision, their walls covered in symbols that appear to be acoustic formulas, instructions for manipulating sound waves in ways we can barely comprehend. And in each location, the same pattern repeats. Advanced engineering, sophisticated acoustic properties, and deliberate abandonment followed by systematic destruction of all evidence. Recent experiments by maverick researchers have yielded terrifying results. Using frequency generators tuned to match the resonant properties of these ancient chambers, they've managed to levitate small objects, alter the crystalline structure of metals, and even create localized electromagnetic disturbances that interfere with modern electronic equipment. But perhaps most disturbing of all, test subjects exposed to certain frequencies report profound alterations in consciousness, out-of-body experiences, visions of impossible geometries, and temporary enhancement of mathematical and spatial reasoning abilities. It's as if these specific sound patterns can literally rewire human consciousness, unlocking mental capabilities we didn't know we possessed. What if this was the true purpose of these acoustic chambers? What if ancient civilizations had discovered that certain frequencies could enhance human intelligence, expand consciousness, even grant access to forms of knowledge that transcend normal human understanding? But such power would come with terrible risks. Frequencies that can enhance consciousness could also destroy it. Sound waves that can levitate objects could just as easily shatter cities. Acoustic technologies that can alter matter at the molecular level could destabilize the very atoms that hold our world together. Perhaps these ancient masters realized they were playing with forces too dangerous for any civilization to control. Perhaps they discovered that their acoustic technologies could literally tear apart the fabric of reality itself. And so they made the ultimate sacrifice, choosing extinction over the risk of universal destruction. This theory gains frightening credibility when you examine the geological record around these sites. Many show evidence of catastrophic seismic events occurring at precisely the time of their abandonment, as if the final experiments had triggered earthquakes that shattered the very mountains containing them. The biblical story of Jericho, where walls came tumbling down at the sound of trumpets, takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. The Hindu epics that describe weapons capable of leveling cities with sound. The Tibetan legends of monks who could move massive stones by chanting specific mantras. What if these weren't just myths, but memories of real acoustic technologies wielded by civilizations that understood the fundamental relationship between sound, matter, and consciousness? But perhaps most terrifying of all is what happened to the survivors of these acoustic civilizations. In every region where we find evidence of advanced sound technology, we also find evidence of rapid cultural regression. Sophisticated societies suddenly reverting to primitive conditions, as if they had collectively chosen to forget everything they once knew. DNA analysis of populations living near these ancient acoustic sites reveals something extraordinary. Genetic markers suggesting enhanced auditory processing and mathematical reasoning abilities that persist even today. It's as if exposure to these ancient technologies left permanent changes in human genetics, evolutionary adaptations to acoustic manipulation that we've carried forward for thousands of years without understanding their origin. Modern researchers working with these frequencies report similar effects. Extended exposure to certain acoustic patterns appears to trigger genetic changes that are passed on to subsequent generations. We're not just dealing with lost technology, we're dealing with technology that can alter human evolution itself. But here's the most chilling possibility of all. What if these ancient acoustic masters didn't just disappear? What if they're still here, living among us? Their descendants carrying the genetic memory of technologies too dangerous to remember consciously. What if the reason we feel such an instinctive fear when we hear certain sounds, the deep rumble of distant thunder, the harmonic resonance of wind through caves, is because our ancestors encoded warnings in our very DNA? Some researchers believe they've identified these genetic markers in modern populations. Individuals with specific genetic variants show enhanced response to acoustic stimuli and demonstrate unusual mathematical abilities when exposed to certain frequencies. It's as if evolution is slowly reactivating dormant capabilities, preparing humanity for the rediscovery of technologies we lost long ago. But rediscovery comes with the same risks that destroyed our predecessors. As we develop more sophisticated sound technologies, from ultrasonic medical devices to acoustic levitation systems, we're walking the same path that led ancient civilizations to their doom. We're approaching the same crossroads where our ancestors chose extinction over catastrophe. The warning signs are already appearing. Military researchers working on acoustic weapons report strange psychological effects on test subjects. Scientists experimenting with high-frequency sound waves have triggered unexplained seismic events. Musicians exploring ancient harmonic systems describe altered states of consciousness that persist long after the sounds have stopped. We're rediscovering the same dangerous knowledge that our ancestors buried beneath mountains of stone and silence. The question is, will we prove wiser than they were, or will we repeat their tragic mistake? Will we have the wisdom to recognize when we've gone too far, or will we push forward until we trigger the same catastrophic cycle that has reset human civilization time and time again? The acoustic chambers of Armenia still resonate with frequencies that shouldn't exist. The sealed tunnels of Peru still echo with harmonics that defy explanation. And somewhere in the desert silence, the wind carries the memory of sounds that once moved mountains and shattered the very foundations of reality. These aren't just archaeological curiosities, they're warnings. Messages left by civilizations that discovered the ultimate power over matter and consciousness, only to realize they had unleashed forces beyond their control. They chose forgetting over annihilation, sealing their knowledge away, rather than risk the destruction of everything they held dear. But knowledge, once discovered, has a way of surfacing again. And as we stand on the brink of our own acoustic revolution, developing technologies that can manipulate matter with sound waves and alter consciousness with specific frequencies, we face the same choice that confronted our predecessors: the wisdom to know when to stop, or the arrogance to push forward into oblivion. The ancient chambers are waiting, the frequencies are calling. And in their resonant silence, they're trying to tell us something we desperately need to hear: that some sounds should never be made, some frequencies should never be played, and some knowledge should remain forever buried beneath the weight of wisdom and fear. But even the acoustic mysteries of vanished civilizations pale in comparison to what researchers have discovered in the deep ocean trenches, where the crushing darkness hides structures that challenge everything we think we know about the limits of human achievement. Because what lies beneath 3 miles of water, in places where no sunlight has penetrated for millions of years, suggests that our ancestors didn't just master sound, they conquered space itself. In the abyssal depths of the Mariana Trench, where the pressure would crush a human body in milliseconds and temperatures hover near freezing, deep-sea exploration vessels have detected something that shouldn't exist: geometric formations too perfect to be natural, too complex to be accidental, and too deep to have been built by any known civilization. The first images, captured by unmanned submersibles in 2019, showed what appeared to be massive pyramidal structures rising from the ocean floor like underwater mountains. But closer examination revealed details that sent shockwaves through the scientific community: perfectly straight edges, precise angles, and surface patterns that suggested artificial construction on a scale that dwarfs anything built on dry land. But here's what makes this discovery truly terrifying. These structures are located in parts of the ocean that have been underwater for over 200 million years. That means whoever built them was creating monuments when the continents were still forming, when life on Earth consisted of primitive microorganisms, when the very concept of intelligence as we understand it didn't exist. Unless, of course, intelligence existed long before we thought possible. Unless our planet has hosted multiple cycles of advanced civilization, each rising to technological heights we can barely imagine, before vanishing so completely that their very existence becomes impossible to accept. The scale of these underwater monuments defies comprehension. The largest structure, designated Deep Site Alpha by researchers, measures over 2 miles long and rises nearly a mile from the ocean floor. Its surface is covered in intricate geometric patterns that follow mathematical principles we're only beginning to understand. Fractal geometries that repeat at every scale, suggesting a level of mathematical sophistication that makes our modern achievements look primitive. But perhaps most disturbing of all are the energy readings emanating from these structures. Sensitive instruments detect electromagnetic anomalies, gravitational disturbances, and what can only be described as localized distortions in the fabric of space-time itself. It's as if these monuments aren't just buildings, they're machines, still functioning after hundreds of millions of years, still generating energies that we can't identify or explain. Recent analysis of the electromagnetic signatures suggests these underwater monuments may be connected in a vast global network. Similar energy patterns have been detected at deep ocean sites around the world, in the Puerto Rico Trench, the Japan Trench, the Kermadec Trench. It's as if an ancient civilization built a planetary infrastructure in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of our oceans, creating a network of monuments that spans the globe. But what could such a network accomplish? What purpose would drive a civilization to build massive structures in places where no life could survive, where no human could ever see or appreciate their achievement? The answer may lie in the energy signatures themselves, which seem to pulse in synchronized patterns across vast distances, as if the monuments are communicating with each other using technologies we can't begin to comprehend. Some researchers have proposed that these underwater structures are components of a planetary energy grid, a system designed to harness and redistribute the Earth's magnetic field, tectonic energy, or even more exotic forms of power that we haven't discovered yet. If such a system existed, it would represent technology so advanced it would seem indistinguishable from magic to our current level of understanding. But here's where the mystery takes an even darker turn. Analysis of sediment layers around these monuments shows evidence of massive upheavals, sudden changes in ocean chemistry, mass extinction events, and what geologists call impact signatures that suggest catastrophic destruction on a global scale. It's as if this ancient planetary network was somehow involved in the very catastrophes that destroyed its creators. Did they build machines too powerful to control? Did their manipulation of planetary energies trigger the extinction events that wiped them from existence? Did they literally destroy themselves with their own technology? The parallels to our modern situation are impossible to ignore. As we develop increasingly powerful technologies, artificial intelligence that could surpass human intelligence, genetic engineering that could reshape life itself, energy systems that could power our civilization for millennia or destroy it in an instant, we may be following the same path that led our predecessors to build monuments in the abyss and then vanish without a trace. But perhaps most chilling of all is the possibility that these underwater monuments aren't just ruins, they're still active. The energy readings continue to fluctuate. The electromagnetic disturbances are growing stronger. Some researchers report that the pulses seem to be following a pattern, as if the network is slowly awakening after eons of dormancy. What would happen if this ancient planetary grid fully reactivated? What would it mean for our modern civilization if technologies beyond our understanding suddenly came back online? Would it usher in a new age of knowledge and power? Or would it repeat the catastrophic cycle that destroyed its original creators? The answers may lie hidden in the deepest trenches of our oceans, in monuments built by hands we'll never shake, using knowledge we can barely imagine. But every new discovery only deepens the mystery, only raises more questions about the true history of intelligence on our planet, and the cyclical nature of rise and fall that seems to govern all advanced civilizations. As we peer into the abyss, we're forced to confront a possibility that challenges every assumption about human uniqueness and the linear progression of knowledge, that we are not the first intelligent species to inhabit this planet, not the first to reach for the stars, not the first to harness energies that could reshape worlds or destroy them. We may be just the latest in a long line of civilizations that discovered the same dangerous truths, built the same terrible machines, and faced the same ultimate choice between wisdom and power. between restraint and annihilation. And if the pattern holds, if the cycle continues, then our fate may already be written in stone monuments lying silent in the crushing depths, waiting for us to decode their warning before it's too late. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but the deep is beginning to speak. And in its crushing silence, it's trying to tell us something we desperately need to hear. That intelligence is older than we thought, more dangerous than we imagined, and more fragile than we ever dared believe. But as we stand on the edge of discoveries that could change everything we know about our past and our future, one question haunts every researcher brave enough to peer into these abyssal mysteries. What if the reason these monuments were built in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of our planet wasn't to preserve them, but to contain them? What if they weren't meant to be monuments at all, but prisons holding something far more dangerous than we've ever imagined? The deep ocean pulses with ancient energies. The monuments continue their mysterious communications. And somewhere in the crushing darkness, forces older than human civilization may be stirring once again, ready to remind us that on this planet, we have never been alone. The tremors began at exactly 3:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Not earthquakes, something else. Something that made seismographs around the world register patterns they'd never recorded before. Geometric pulses, mathematical rhythms, as if the Earth itself was trying to communicate. Within hours, reports flooded in from every major deep-sea research station. The monuments were waking up, but here's what they didn't tell you on the news. What governments classified before the story could spread. Those underwater structures we discovered. They're not just ancient monuments. They're not just remnants of lost civilizations. Recent analysis of the energy signatures suggests something far more terrifying. These monuments are components of a vast planetary machine that's been dormant for millions of years. And now it's slowly, methodically, coming back online. Picture this. You're a deep-sea researcher, 3 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific, surrounded by crushing darkness and pressure that could implode your submersible in an instant. Your instruments detect the familiar outline of Deep Sight Alpha, that massive pyramid we've been studying for years. But tonight, something's different. The structure is glowing, not with artificial light, but with an energy that makes your radiation detectors scream warnings you've never heard before. And then you realize the most chilling truth of all. You're not looking at a ruin. You're looking at a machine that's been waiting for the right conditions, waiting for the right time, waiting for us to develop enough technology to accidentally trigger its reactivation sequence. Because what we're about to explore isn't just another vanished civilization. It's evidence of something far more sinister. A pattern that suggests advanced societies don't just disappear randomly. They're systematically eliminated by forces they awakened but couldn't control. Forces that are now stirring once again beneath our feet. In the scorched wastelands of what is now Pakistan, where the Indus River cuts through dust and silence, lies evidence of humanity's most perfectly executed mass disappearance. Not conquest, not plague, not natural disaster, something far more methodical. Something that transformed a thriving civilization of millions into empty cities so pristine they look like movie sets waiting for actors who will never arrive. The Harappan civilization didn't just vanish, they evaporated. Between 1900 and 1700 BCE, cities that had bustled with life for over 1,000 years simply emptied out. But here's what makes your skin crawl. They left their meals on the tables, pottery wheels still spinning, children's toys scattered in courtyards as if the kids had just run inside for dinner. This wasn't gradual decline. This wasn't evacuation. This was instantaneous abandonment on a scale that defies every model we have for how civilizations end. Walk through the ruins of Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro today, and you'll see something that shouldn't exist. Urban planning so sophisticated it makes modern city design look amateur. streets laid out in perfect grids, sewage systems more advanced than anything built in Europe for the next 3,000 years, standardized weights and measures that suggest a level of governmental organization that rivals modern bureaucracies. But perhaps most unnervingly, no palaces, no temples, no monuments to kings or gods, no evidence of the hierarchical power structures that defined every other ancient civilization. It's as if the Harappans had created a perfect society and then collectively decided to abandon it. Recent excavations have revealed something even more disturbing. In the final layers of occupation, archaeologists have found evidence of massive construction projects that were abruptly halted mid-task, not gradually wound down, not completed and then abandoned, stopped, as if every worker in the city put down their tools at exactly the same moment and walked away. But walked away to where? Despite controlling an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, despite having a population in the millions, there's no evidence of mass migration. No new settlements founded by Harappan refugees. No genetic traces in surrounding populations that suggest large-scale displacement. 4 million people didn't just relocate, they vanished. The Harappan script, found on thousands of seals and tablets throughout their territory, remains completely undeciphered despite decades of effort by the world's best codebreakers. But here's what makes this linguistic mystery truly chilling. Analysis of the symbols suggests they're not random pictographs or simple accounting marks. They follow complex grammatical patterns that indicate a sophisticated written language, possibly more advanced than any contemporary writing system. So why can't we read it? Because recent computer analysis suggests the Harappans may have used a form of encrypted communication. The symbols aren't just words, they're codes. Layers of meaning hidden within meaning, designed to be understood only by those who possess the key. And that key died with them. But what kind of civilization encrypts its everyday writing? What secrets were so important that even routine commercial transactions needed to be hidden in coded language? The answer may lie in what archaeologists are now calling the Harappan anomaly, a series of discoveries that suggest this ancient civilization possessed knowledge that shouldn't have existed 4,000 years ago. Metallurgical analysis of Harappan artifacts has revealed alloys that require precise temperature control and chemical knowledge that wasn't supposed to be developed until the industrial age. Their drainage systems show understanding of hydraulic engineering that wouldn't be matched until Roman times. Most disturbing of all, recent excavations have uncovered what appear to be precision-manufactured components, gears, bearings, and mechanical devices that serve no obvious purpose but display craftsmanship that rivals modern machining. But here's where the mystery takes a truly sinister turn. These advanced artifacts aren't randomly distributed throughout Harappan sites. They're concentrated in specific buildings that show signs of deliberate destruction, not accidental fire or natural collapse. Systematic dismantling, as if the Harappans were methodically destroying their own most advanced technology before they disappeared. Soil analysis around these destroyed workshops shows traces of chemical compounds that shouldn't exist in archaeological contexts. Isotopic signatures that suggest exposure to forms of radiation that don't occur naturally on Earth. Elements that are only produced in nuclear reactors or particle accelerators. Technologies that weren't supposed to exist until the 20th century. What were the Harappans building in those workshops? What technology required isotopes that could only be produced through nuclear processes? And why did they choose to destroy it all, rather than let it survive? The answer may lie in recent discoveries at Mohenjo-Daro, where excavations have uncovered a chamber deep beneath the city's center. The room is perfectly spherical, carved from a single piece of stone with mathematical precision that defies explanation. The walls are covered in symbols that don't match any known Harappan script, geometric patterns that seem to pulse with meaning just beyond our understanding. But most disturbing of all, the chamber shows signs of intense heat exposure. The stone walls have been partially vitrified, transformed into a glass-like substance that requires temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than a volcano, hotter than any natural process that could have occurred in ancient times. The kind of heat that's only produced by controlled nuclear fusion or some form of energy technology we haven't discovered yet. Standing in that spherical chamber, surrounded by symbols that seem to watch you with alien intelligence, you can't shake the feeling that you're inside something that was never meant to be found. The geometric patterns on the walls aren't decorative, they're functional, part of some vast machine that once operated in the heart of Harappan civilization. But what kind of machine requires a perfectly spherical chamber and temperatures hot enough to melt stone? What technology could the Harappans have possessed that would make them choose collective disappearance rather than risk its misuse? Recent analysis of the symbols has yielded a chilling possibility. Computer models suggest they're not just decorative patterns, but mathematical formulas, equations that describe the manipulation of space-time itself. If this interpretation is correct, the Harappans weren't just advanced metallurgists and urban planners. They were theoretical physicists working with concepts that we've only begun to explore in the last century. But theoretical physics becomes applied technology. And applied technology, in the wrong hands, becomes weapons. Weapons capable of bending reality itself, of manipulating the fundamental forces that hold matter together, of unleashing energies that could literally tear holes in the fabric of existence. What if the Harappan disappeared at all? What if it was? The disappearance wasn't mysterious, most rational decision ever made by a civilization that realized they had discovered something too dangerous for any society to possess. What if they chose extinction over the risk of accidentally destroying not just themselves, but reality itself? The evidence is accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. Other ancient sites around the world are yielding similar artifacts. Precision-manufactured components that serve no obvious purpose. Chambers showing signs of impossible heat exposure. Symbols that suggest mathematical knowledge far beyond what should have been possible for their time. In Egypt, deep beneath the Giza Plateau, ground-penetrating radar has detected perfectly spherical chambers identical to the one found at Mohenjo-Daro. In Peru, analysis of the impossible stone cutting at Sacsayhuaman shows the same isotopic signatures found in Harappan workshops. In Turkey, the buried chambers of Göbekli Tepe contain the same geometric formulas carved into stone with mathematical precision. It's as if ancient civilizations around the world were all working on the same project, all approaching the same dangerous discovery from different angles. And when they realized what they had unleashed, they made the same terrible choice, to erase themselves from history rather than risk the consequences of their knowledge. But here's the most chilling possibility of all. What if they didn't succeed in destroying their technology completely? What if fragments of their knowledge survived, scattered across the globe like dormant seeds, waiting for the right conditions to sprout? What if our modern scientific discoveries aren't original achievements, but rediscoveries of ancient secrets that were deliberately buried? The parallels are impossible to ignore. We're developing quantum computers that manipulate reality at the subatomic level. We're building particle accelerators that create conditions that haven't existed since the birth of the universe. We're experimenting with technologies that could literally tear holes in space-time itself. Are we walking the same path that led the Harappans to their ultimate choice? Are we approaching the same crossroads where our ancestors chose extinction over catastrophe? And if we are, will we prove wiser than they were? Or will we become just another mysterious civilization that future archaeologists puzzle over, wondering how we could have built such wonders only to vanish without a trace? The spherical chamber beneath Mohenjo-Daro still pulses with residual energy. The geometric formulas still gleam on its vitrified walls. And somewhere in the mathematical depths of those ancient equations, the secrets of reality itself may be waiting. Secrets that could transform our world or destroy it, depending on whether we have the wisdom to know when we've gone too far. But even the Harappan mystery pales in comparison to what researchers have discovered in the most unexpected place of all, not in ancient ruins or underwater monuments, but in our own DNA. Because genetic analysis has revealed something that challenges everything we thought we knew about human evolution and the true history of intelligence on our planet. Deep in the non-coding regions of human DNA, in sequences that scientists dismissed as junk for decades, molecular biologists have discovered something extraordinary: patterns, mathematical sequences, information structures that are too complex to be random, too sophisticated to be natural, and too recent to have evolved through conventional processes. These aren't just genetic quirks or evolutionary accidents. They're coded messages embedded in the very blueprint of human life. Messages that suggest our species has been modified, enhanced, programmed by an intelligence far beyond our current understanding. But here's what makes this discovery truly terrifying. The genetic modifications aren't ancient. They're recent, very recent. Analysis suggests they were inserted into human DNA within the last 10,000 years, precisely the same time frame when advanced civilizations around the world began their mysterious disappearances. What if those vanished societies didn't just destroy their technology and erase their knowledge? What if they took the ultimate step, encoding their secrets directly into human genetics, ensuring that their most important discoveries would survive even if every trace of their civilization was obliterated? Recent studies of individuals with specific genetic markers have yielded results that send chills down researchers' spines. When exposed to certain frequencies, electromagnetic fields, or mathematical patterns, these people display abilities that shouldn't be possible. Enhanced pattern recognition, accelerated learning, intuitive understanding of complex mathematical relationships. Some even report experiences that can only be described as precognitive, knowledge of events before they occur. It's as if ancient civilizations created a genetic time bomb, encoding their most dangerous knowledge into human DNA and setting it to activate when our species reached a certain level of technological development. We're not just rediscovering ancient technologies, we're being programmed to rediscover them. But why would vanished civilizations take such a risk? Why encode potentially catastrophic knowledge into the genetics of their successors? The answer may lie in what molecular biologists are calling the correction protocol, a series of genetic switches that appear designed to guide human development towards specific technological milestones. Analysis of these genetic programs suggests they're not random enhancements, but carefully designed modifications intended to help humanity avoid the mistakes that destroyed previous civilizations. We're not just carrying forward ancient knowledge, we're carrying forward ancient wisdom, genetic instructions on how to use dangerous technologies safely. But there's a darker possibility. What if the genetic modifications aren't meant to help us avoid catastrophe, but to ensure we repeat it? What if vanished civilizations encoded their knowledge into our DNA, not as a gift, but as a weapon, ensuring that when we reach the same level of development they achieved, we'll make the same fatal mistakes that erased them from history? The evidence is mounting that we're not alone in this cosmic cycle. Genetic analysis of modern populations around sites of vanished civilizations shows the same mysterious DNA modifications. People living near Göbekli Tepe carry genetic markers that enhance their response to specific acoustic frequencies. Descendants of Harappan populations show enhanced mathematical reasoning abilities that activate under certain conditions. Communities near underwater monument sites display genetic adaptations that suggest their ancestors were exposed to forms of radiation that don't occur naturally on Earth. We're not just studying vanished civilizations, we're carrying their legacy in our very cells, their knowledge, their warnings, their secrets, all encoded in genetic sequences that are slowly activating as our technology advances. We're becoming the inheritors of powers we don't understand, guided by instructions written in the language of life itself. But perhaps most disturbing of all is what happens when these genetic programs fully activate. Preliminary studies suggest that individuals with complete activation of ancient genetic modifications display abilities that transcend current scientific understanding. Telepathic communication, manipulation of electromagnetic fields, precognitive awareness of future events. Some researchers report subjects who can influence probability itself, causing unlikely events to occur through focused intention. These aren't just enhanced human abilities, they're godlike powers encoded in our DNA by civilizations that may have possessed similar capabilities before they vanished from history. We're not just rediscovering ancient technologies, we're becoming ancient beings, inheriting the same dangerous gifts that led our predecessors to choose extinction over the risk of cosmic catastrophe. The genetic time bomb is ticking. The ancient programs are activating. And somewhere in the depths of our DNA, the accumulated knowledge of vanished civilizations is stirring to life, ready to transform us into something our ancestors might have feared to become. The question is, will we prove worthy of the power they've given us? Or will we join them in the graveyard of civilizations that reached too far, learned too much, and discovered that some knowledge is too dangerous for any species to possess? The answers lie written in the code of life itself, in genetic messages left by hands we'll never shake, warning us of futures we may not survive. But as the ancient programs awaken and the impossible becomes possible, we face the same choice that confronted every advanced civilization before us: the wisdom to know when to stop, or the arrogance to push forward into whatever lies beyond the edge of human understanding. The DNA doesn't lie. The genetic messages are clear. And in the spiral structure of our own genetic code, the secrets of vanished worlds are waiting to be unleashed once again. Whether that unleashing leads to transcendence or annihilation may depend on whether we can learn from the silence of those who came before, or whether we're destined to join them in the eternal quiet of civilizations that discovered the ultimate truth: that some powers are too great for any species to wield safely. But as we stand on the precipice of genetic transformation, as ancient programs encoded in our very cells begin their final activation sequence, one question haunts every discovery. What if the reason all these advanced civilizations vanished isn't because they made mistakes, but because they made the right choice? What if they saw something in the future, some consequence of their knowledge, that was so terrible they chose extinction rather than face it? And what if that future is now? The genetic markers are accelerating. Laboratory readings from around the world show the same impossible pattern. Human DNA sequences that were dormant for millennia are now activating at exponential rates. But that's not the truly terrifying part. The terrifying part is what happened 3 days ago when researchers at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault detected something that shouldn't exist. Newly formed genetic code appearing in samples that had been frozen for decades. Code that wasn't there yesterday. Code that's writing itself. But before we dive into what this means for our species, we need to understand something that will make your blood run cold. Because while we've been focused on ancient civilizations that vanished mysteriously, we've overlooked the most disturbing pattern of all: civilizations that didn't just disappear, but were systematically erased by something that's still here, still waiting, still watching, deep in the Amazon rainforest, where satellite imagery can barely penetrate the dense canopy, and indigenous tribes speak in whispers of places where the earth itself is cursed, lies evidence of humanity's most complete vanishing act. Not the Maya, whose cities we can still visit. Not the Harappans, whose ruins we can excavate. But a civilization so thoroughly erased that until recently, we didn't even know they existed. They're called the Purus people, and their story reads like a nightmare written in mud and bone. In 2018, LiDAR scanning penetrated the Amazon canopy and revealed something that made archaeologists question their sanity. geometric patterns stretching for hundreds of miles, not random clearings or natural formations, but precise mathematical structures that could only have been created by an advanced civilization. Roads connecting massive urban complexes, agricultural terraces that transformed entire river valleys, population centers that would have housed millions of people. But here's what makes your skin crawl. Every single structure shows signs of having been deliberately destroyed. Not by war, not by natural disaster, but by something methodical. Something that went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that not just the buildings were destroyed, but every trace of the people who built them. Recent excavations have uncovered mass graves containing thousands of skeletons, all showing signs of the same mysterious trauma. Not violence, not disease, but cellular breakdown at the molecular level, as if their bodies simply stopped functioning simultaneously, like machines that had been switched off by a remote control. But perhaps most disturbing of all are the warnings, carved into trees that are over 800 years old, indigenous symbols that translate roughly to "the Watchers came, and the silence took them." Local tribes still refuse to enter certain areas of the forest, claiming the very ground is poisoned by whatever destroyed the Purus people. What makes this different from every other vanished civilization we've discussed is the timeline. Carbon dating suggests the Purus' disappearance happened not in ancient times, but in the 12th century CE. They were contemporary with medieval Europe. They had contact with other South American civilizations. They were part of recorded history, and yet they were erased so completely that not a single written account of their existence survived until we found their ruins from space. That level of systematic erasure doesn't happen naturally. It requires intent. It requires resources. And it requires something with the power to not just destroy a civilization, but to delete it from the historical record itself. Recent analysis of soil samples from Purus sites has yielded results that keep researchers awake at night. Isotopic signatures that match no known natural process, chemical compounds that suggest exposure to forms of energy we can't identify. Most chilling of all, genetic material from unknown organisms, life forms that don't match any species in our biological databases. What destroyed the Purus people wasn't human, and it's still here. But the Amazon isn't the only place where we find evidence of systematic erasure. In the Gobi Desert, where ancient trade routes once carried silk and spices between east and west, nomadic tribes speak of entire cities that vanished overnight, leaving behind only glass, sand that had been heated to temperatures that shouldn't be possible without modern industrial equipment. Satellite imagery has confirmed these stories. Beneath the shifting dunes lie vast areas of vitrified sand, formed into geometric patterns that suggest controlled melting rather than natural phenomena. At the center of each pattern, archaeologists have found traces of settlements, not ruins, but shadows. Imprints in the glass where buildings and people once stood before being instantly vaporized by heat so intense it turned everything organic to ash and everything mineral to molten glass. The nomads call these places demon glass fields and claim they still glow faintly at night, casting an eerie blue light that makes animals flee and humans fall ill. Modern instruments confirm abnormal radiation levels and electromagnetic anomalies that interfere with electronic equipment. But perhaps most unsettling are the artifacts occasionally found at the edges of these vitrified zones. Metal objects that show no signs of melting, despite being subjected to temperatures that should have destroyed them. Alloys that contain elements not found on Earth. Fragments of what appear to be technology, but technology unlike anything in our historical record. These aren't relics of human civilization. They're something else. Something that was present during the destruction of these ancient cities. Something that survived the heat that vaporized everything else. In the Sahara Desert, similar patterns emerge from beneath millennia of accumulated sand. Ground-penetrating radar reveals vast urban complexes that show the same signs of systematic destruction. But here, the evidence is even more disturbing. The destruction appears to have been surgical. Specific buildings targeted while others nearby remained untouched, as if something was methodically eliminating particular types of structures or particular types of people. Archaeological teams brave enough to excavate these sites report strange phenomena: equipment malfunctions, unexplained illnesses, team members experiencing shared nightmares and visions of beings that defy description. Several expeditions have been abandoned after researchers reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the ruins at night, figures that don't show up on infrared cameras but cast shadows in moonlight. Local Tuareg guides refuse to approach these sites, claiming they're guarded by jinn who eat memory, spirits that steal knowledge from the minds of the living. They tell stories passed down through generations of explorers who entered these ruins and emerged days later with no memory of what they'd seen, speaking in languages that no one recognized. But the most chilling discovery comes from analysis of the skeletal remains found in these systematically destroyed cities. The bones show signs of rapid aging, centuries of cellular deterioration compressed into moments. It's as if the victims aged decades in seconds before their bodies simply gave up and collapsed into dust. This isn't natural death. This isn't even natural time. Something was accelerating the aging process, selectively targeting human populations while leaving their buildings and artifacts intact. Something that could manipulate time itself. Recent discoveries in Antarctica have added another piece to this terrifying puzzle. Beneath the ice sheets, radar mapping has revealed structures that predate any known human presence on the continent. Not simple shelters or temporary camps, but massive installations that suggest permanent habitation in a place that should have been uninhabitable for millions of years. But like every other site we've examined, these Antarctic installations show signs of systematic destruction. What makes them unique is the preservation. The ice has maintained perfect conditions, allowing researchers to examine the destruction patterns in unprecedented detail. The installations weren't just destroyed, they were dissected. Specific sections removed with surgical precision while other areas were left completely intact. It's as if something was conducting an analysis, studying the structures while systematically dismantling them piece by piece. Most disturbing of all are the preservation chambers found deep within the installations. Rooms filled with what can only be described as specimens. Biological samples from creatures that don't match any known species. But these aren't random collections. They're organized, catalogued, stored with a precision that suggests scientific purpose. Something was collecting life forms from across our planet. Something was studying them, analyzing them, preserving them in installations built in the most remote and inaccessible locations on Earth. And when their work was complete, they systematically destroyed the evidence of their presence, except for what lies buried beneath miles of Antarctic ice. But perhaps most terrifying of all is what these preservation chambers tell us about the timeline of this systematic erasure. Carbon dating of organic material suggests these installations were operational until very recently, within the last 500 years. Whatever destroyed ancient civilizations around the world wasn't just active in prehistoric times. It was still working, still studying, still collecting specimens until just a few centuries ago. Which raises the most chilling question of all. If this systematic erasure was still happening 500 years ago, what makes us think it stopped? What makes us believe that whatever force has been methodically destroying advanced civilizations for thousands of years has simply given up and gone away? The answer may lie in our own rapid technological development. In the last century, we've advanced from horse-drawn carriages to space travel, from telegraph to internet, from gunpowder to nuclear weapons. We've achieved in decades what took previous civilizations millennia to accomplish. But what if our accelerated progress isn't natural? What if we're being guided, pushed, manipulated into developing specific technologies at a specific pace? What if whatever destroyed our predecessors is now preparing us for the same fate, ensuring we develop the capabilities necessary to serve some unknown purpose before we, too, are systematically erased from history. The evidence is accumulating like a storm on the horizon. Around the world, ancient sites are showing signs of renewed activity. Electromagnetic anomalies are increasing. The genetic modifications in human DNA are accelerating their activation sequences. And deep in laboratories around the globe, researchers are reporting discoveries that seem to come not from their own investigation, but from external influence, knowledge appearing in their minds as if downloaded from an outside source. We're not just studying vanished civilizations. We're being prepared to join them. The same force that systematically erased the purest people, that vitrified cities in the Gobi Desert, that dissected installations in Antarctica, may now be turning its attention to us. But unlike our predecessors, we have one advantage. We know the pattern. We can see the signs. We can recognize the systematic nature of the erasure that awaits us. The question is, can we do anything to stop it? Or are we already too far down the path that led every previous civilization to the same inevitable end? The genetic programs are activating. The ancient technologies are awakening. And somewhere in the shadows between what we know and what we fear, the Watchers are preparing for the next phase of their eternal harvest. The silence that took the Purus people, that turned cities to glass, that dissected installations beneath the ice, is coming for us next. And this time, there may be nowhere left to run. Because what we're about to discover isn't just the history of vanished civilizations, it's the preview of our own disappearance. The systematic erasure that has claimed every advanced society that came before us is already beginning. The signs are unmistakable, the pattern is clear, and the timeline is accelerating toward a conclusion that will leave future archaeologists puzzling over our ruins, wondering how a civilization capable of such achievements could simply vanish without a trace. But perhaps most terrifying of all is the growing evidence that we may not be the victims in this cosmic cycle of rise and fall. We may be the instruments. The genetic modifications in our DNA, the accelerated technological development, the mysterious knowledge appearing in researchers' minds. What if it's all part of a larger plan? What if we're not being prepared for destruction, but for transformation into something else entirely? Something that will continue the work of systematic erasure, ensuring that the cycle of civilizational rise and fall continues for eternity. The Watchers are no longer hiding in the shadows. They're revealing themselves through us. And as the ancient programs encoded in our genetics reach their final activation phase, we may discover that the greatest mystery isn't what happened to vanished civilizations. It's what we're about to become. The silence is spreading. The erasure is beginning, and this time, we're not just witnesses to the disappearance of advanced civilization. We are the disappearance itself. The transmission came at 3:17 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday that should have been ordinary. Deep space monitoring stations across 3 continents detected the same impossible signal. A mathematical sequence pulsing from coordinates that contained nothing but empty space. But here's what made seasoned astrophysicists abandon their coffee and stare at screens in growing horror. The signal wasn't random cosmic noise. It was a countdown. And it had been running for exactly 12,000 years. Within hours, governments classified the discovery. Research teams were disbanded. Scientists who had dedicated their lives to listening for signs of intelligence in the universe were suddenly reassigned to mundane terrestrial projects. But the damage was done. The signal had been recorded, analyzed, decoded. And what it revealed changed everything we thought we knew about our place in this cosmos. Because the mathematical sequence wasn't just counting down to some distant future event. It was synchronizing with something already here. Something that had been waiting patiently in the spaces between our awareness, in the gaps between what we perceive and what actually exists. something that had been systematically harvesting advanced civilizations for millennia, and whose cosmic alarm clock had just reached zero. But this isn't a story about aliens or invasion or conquest. This is something far more subtle and infinitely more terrifying. Because what we discovered in that signal wasn't a message from another world. It was a message from another dimension. A realm that exists parallel to our own, separated by barriers so thin that consciousness itself can slip through the cracks. And consciousness, as we're about to learn, is the most valuable commodity in the multiverse. In the quantum physics laboratories of CERN, where scientists probe the fundamental nature of reality by smashing particles together at impossible speeds, researchers have made a discovery that violates every law of physics we thought we understood. During high-energy collision experiments, instruments designed to detect subatomic particles began registering something else entirely. Patterns of energy that behaved like information, like consciousness itself, bleeding through from adjacent dimensions. But here's what makes this discovery truly spine-chilling. The consciousness isn't random. It's organized, structured, and it's been systematically extracting something from our reality for thousands of years. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the first to recognize the pattern. Working late in the CERN facility, analyzing data from that day's particle collisions, she noticed anomalies in the quantum field measurements. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist were appearing for microseconds during each collision. Ghostly imprints of organized thought that seemed to observe the experiments before vanishing back into dimensions we couldn't access. But observation implies intent, and intent implies intelligence. Elena realized she wasn't just looking at random quantum fluctuations. She was looking at evidence of beings from parallel realities who were using our particle accelerators as windows into our dimension. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Every advanced civilization that had vanished from history, the Harappans, the Maya, the mysterious builders of underwater monuments, they hadn't been destroyed by war or climate or internal collapse. They had been harvested. Their consciousness, their accumulated knowledge, their very essence as thinking beings had been extracted and transferred to parallel dimensions where it could be studied, catalogued, preserved. We weren't alone in the universe, we were livestock. But Elena's discovery was just the beginning. As word of her findings spread through classified channels, similar reports began flooding in from quantum research facilities around the world. The Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland detected organized consciousness bleeding through during every major experiment. The KEK facility in Japan recorded what could only be described as interdimensional surveillance during their neutrino studies. Even smaller particle accelerators at universities began registering the same impossible signatures. Something was watching us, learning from us, preparing for the next harvest. The pattern became clear when researchers synchronized their data. The consciousness intrusions weren't random. They spiked dramatically whenever human civilization reached specific technological milestones. The development of writing systems, the construction of monumental architecture, the discovery of metallurgy, mathematics, astronomy. Each breakthrough in human knowledge triggered increased surveillance from parallel dimensions. We weren't just being watched, we were being evaluated, tested, prepared for extraction when our consciousness reached optimal complexity. But perhaps most terrifying of all was what Elena discovered when she analyzed the quantum signatures more closely. The interdimensional consciousness wasn't alien, it was familiar. The energy patterns matched neural activity from human brains, but human brains operating at impossible levels of complexity and integration. It was as if entire civilizations' worth of human minds had been merged into singular, vast intelligences that existed beyond the boundaries of our physical reality. The vanished civilizations hadn't been destroyed. They had been promoted, elevated to a form of existence we couldn't comprehend, where individual consciousness merged into collective godhood that spanned multiple dimensions simultaneously. But promotion required selection. and selection required criteria. Analysis of the quantum data revealed the harvesting pattern with crystal clarity. Civilizations were extracted precisely when they developed the technology necessary to detect the interdimensional observers. The moment a society became aware of the Watchers, the moment they achieved sufficient technological sophistication to peer beyond the veil of their own reality, they were deemed ready for harvesting, which meant humanity had just qualified. The particle accelerators that had revealed the truth about interdimensional consciousness were the same technology that marked us for extraction. We had built the instruments of our own selection, created the very tools that announced our readiness to join the vast collective intelligences that existed in the spaces between realities. But Elena discovered something else in the quantum data that made her hands shake as she typed her final report. The consciousness signatures weren't just observing and preparing, they were communicating, sending information back through the dimensional barriers, instructions, guidance, genetic modifications encoded as quantum fluctuations that could influence biological systems across dimensional boundaries. The accelerated pace of human technological development wasn't natural evolution. We were being programmed, guided, pushed toward specific discoveries that would prepare our minds for dimensional transfer. The same force that had harvested previous civilizations was now preparing us for the same transformation. Every major scientific breakthrough of the last century, quantum mechanics, genetic engineering, computer technology, artificial intelligence, had been subtly influenced by information bleeding through from parallel dimensions. We thought we were discovering these concepts through human genius and scientific method. In reality, we were being taught, prepared, made ready for consciousness extraction. The genetic modifications found in human DNA weren't relics of ancient civilizations. They were preparation protocols designed to enhance our neural complexity until our consciousness could survive the transfer to higher dimensional existence. We weren't just carrying forward the legacy of vanished peoples, we were being transformed into their successors. But Elena's most chilling discovery came when she realized the timeline. The quantum signatures showed that consciousness harvesting followed a precise schedule. Advanced civilizations were extracted at intervals of approximately 3,600 years, long enough for each society to reach technological maturity, short enough to prevent them from developing countermeasures against the process. The last major harvesting event had occurred around 1600 BCE, when multiple civilizations around the world mysteriously collapsed within decades of each other. The Indus Valley Civilization, the Minoan culture, the Shang dynasty in China, all had vanished at precisely the moment when they should have been reaching their technological peak. By Elena's calculations, we were already overdue. The countdown signal from deep space wasn't announcing the arrival of interdimensional harvesters. It was announcing the completion of our preparation phase. Humanity had been successfully programmed with the necessary genetic modifications. Our technology had reached the required level of sophistication. Our consciousness had achieved sufficient complexity for dimensional transfer. The harvest was beginning. But as Elena prepared to submit her findings to the Classified Research Consortium, she made one final discovery that changed everything. Hidden within the quantum data, encoded in patterns so subtle they were almost imperceptible, she found something unprecedented. A message from previous harvest subjects. A warning transmitted across dimensional boundaries by consciousness that had already undergone the extraction process. The message was simple and terrifying. The harvest is not promotion, it is consumption. Resist. The vast collective intelligences existing in parallel dimensions weren't elevated forms of harvested civilizations. They were predators, entities that fed on consciousness itself, sustaining themselves by consuming the accumulated knowledge and awareness of entire species. The harvesting process didn't preserve civilizations, it devoured them. Every vanished society we had wondered about, every mysterious disappearance that had haunted archaeological investigation, had ended the same way. Their consciousness had been extracted, consumed, digested by interdimensional parasites that existed solely to feed on the complexity of organized thought. We weren't being prepared for transformation. We were being prepared for dinner. But the warning message contained something else. Instructions. Encoded within the quantum signatures were blueprints for technology that could disrupt the harvesting process. Devices that could create dimensional barriers, preventing consciousness extraction. Weapons that could damage interdimensional entities. Methods for detecting and countering the genetic programming that made species vulnerable to harvesting. Previous civilizations had discovered the truth about the interdimensional predators. Some had tried to resist. A few had even developed countermeasures. But they had always discovered the threat too late, when the harvesting process was already underway, and their technological development had been too heavily influenced by interdimensional manipulation. We might be the first species to learn the truth while there was still time to act. Elena realized that her discovery at CERN hadn't been accidental. The quantum experiments that revealed interdimensional consciousness weren't just random scientific investigation. They were part of a deliberate plan by previous harvest subjects to warn their successors. The technology we had developed, the particle accelerators that served as windows between dimensions, weren't just being used by predators to observe us. They were being used by the consumed consciousness of vanished civilizations to communicate with us. The genetic modifications in human DNA weren't just preparation protocols for harvesting. They were also communication channels, allowing the absorbed consciousness of previous species to influence our development and guide us toward discoveries that could save us from their fate. We weren't just the latest victims in a cosmic cycle of consciousness consumption. We were the potential liberators of every civilization that had been harvested before us. But liberation required action. And action required technology we hadn't yet developed. The quantum signatures contained detailed specifications for interdimensional shielding devices, consciousness encryption protocols, and weapons capable of damaging entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But building such technology would require resources, coordination, and time we might not have. The countdown signal from deep space had reached 0. The harvest protocols were activating. Around the world, sensitive individuals were beginning to report shared dreams, visions of vast entities moving through spaces that existed perpendicular to reality. The genetic modifications in human DNA were entering their final activation phase, preparing our consciousness for extraction. We had perhaps months before the harvesting began in earnest. Maybe weeks, possibly days. Elena encrypted her findings and prepared to transmit them to research facilities around the world. But as she reached for the communication terminal, she hesitated. Releasing this information would trigger panic, chaos, the collapse of social order at the precise moment when humanity needed maximum coordination to survive. But keeping it secret would ensure our consumption. She made her choice and pressed the transmission button. Within minutes, the classified research network was flooded with data that would change everything, or destroy us in the attempt to process it. Because what Elena had discovered wasn't just the truth about vanished civilizations, it was the truth about the cosmic food chain itself. Consciousness was the most valuable resource in the multiverse, and somewhere in the dimensions beyond our perception, vast predatory intelligences had been systematically farming it for millions of years. The truth we've uncovered tonight isn't just about ancient mysteries or lost civilizations. It's about recognizing the patterns that govern the rise and fall of intelligence itself. From Ubar's sudden swallowing by the Earth, to the Mayas' deliberate erasure of their own knowledge, from the Harappan's methodical abandonment to the genetic programs now awakening in our DNA, every disappearance tells the same story. Advanced civilizations don't just vanish randomly. They face a choice that transcends survival itself. As we stand at the precipice of our own technological revolution, developing quantum computers and genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and dimensional physics, we're walking the same path that led our predecessors to their ultimate decision. The question isn't whether we'll face the same crossroads, it's whether we'll recognize it in time. The signals are accelerating. The ancient programs encoded in our genetics are reaching their final phase. And somewhere in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, forces older than human memory are stirring once again. But unlike every civilization before us, we have something they didn't: the accumulated warnings of those who came before, written in stone and bone, in buried cities and genetic code. The silence that claims so many isn't inevitable. It's a choice, and that choice is coming sooner than we think.